Welcome to Aur Batao. This is Kritarth.
This is Ravi.
This is Ayush.
This is Arunim.
This is Saket. Let's get it started.
IIT Delhi alums Abhishek and Surbhi were pursuing traditional entrepreneurship and higher education before they plunged into the realms of social entrepreneurship by starting their educational startup called Navgurukul. In this episode, we talk about their journey, their motivation, the shortfall of the current system, and their broader philosophy of education. Let's hear from the people looking to revive our ancient Gurukul system in the era of rat race.
I think even before going into what you're doing right now, you probably want to understand the mindset that it requires to basically venture into something like this, right? Like if you go to elite college like IIT, where the badge of being there will probably set you up for life, if not up for life, or at least for your first job, right? What exactly is the mindset actually?
I'll add to that question. Like, what were you doing just before this? So, like, we were probably on a path. I remember you were into entrepreneurship while you were in college. You created a startup when you were in college.
So when I started, Navgurukul, I don't think social entrepreneurship was very big towards, at least in my circle. I'd never heard about it. So when I started Navgurukul, I did not know social entrepreneurship. I did not know anyone who started an NGO. So for me, it was completely new. It was just something I knew had to be done. Whether it goes to non-profit, for-profit, social enterprise, those were all tech words for it. But I think my mindset particularly was sort of reckless in one way. I mean, I started my first startup, where we made a lot of mistakes, fortunately, and then we got it semi-quiet sort of thing. So that gave me some cash liquidity in my life. That also helped me to ask some important questions about money. At least, what does it mean to me? What do I really want to do with it? And a lot of questions I would start asking to people, like, what would you do if you had a lot of money? And most of the times, answers were very cliched and very like there was just answers like, I'll buy a house near a beach and just lie down there and fish and whatnot. So interestingly, most of the answers did not require money. They didn't require what they were basically doing. But we were just living in a romantic world where we wanted to do something that we could do right away itself. So coupled with those ideas, I think I just like it's just going to be a loop here. I'm going to stuck if I keep doing it. And the question that really helped me was, how much money do I need to make before I retire? So I and my co-founder came to a number of 5 crores. That if we have 5 crores in the bank account, we should retire. We don't need to think about money after that. Whether on retiring we work for companies or we work for a team, it's a different question altogether. But then my co-founder already had 10 crores in his bank account. Fortunately. I said, Niku, you already have 10 crores. He said, yeah, but then why are you not retiring? He said, no, I don't know. So that again was a reminder that it's a loop. You don't sort of get out of it unless you want to get out of it. Another thing that helped me to sort of take this plunge was to understand that I can make money whenever I want to. So I did not tell myself that I'm not going to make money. I just told myself that this is not the time I'm going to make. So if I want to make money at 35, I'll make money at 35. What I'm doing right now does not make me any less valuable than or less commodity driven than earlier. So I just delayed the question of having money, and I said, okay, I'll do it whenever I want. And right now, my focus is to meet my aspirations, and my degree is or my background has to be an asset to it and not liability. So if someone says, but you are an IIT, so I says, okay, fine. Is that degree supposed to be liability or an asset? If it is liability, then it's fine. I mean, your question is very right. But how are you going to sort of do it with the IIT? But I've considered it as an asset. So whatever I'm going to do is going to help me out. So I just need to identify what I want to do and understand that degree is supposed to be my asset. So yeah, so I think these kind of conversations and changes really help me.
Great answer. And I think the amount of clarity that you have in your head is like insane, I would say.
So do you think people who might be listening this know what Navgurukul is?
Why don't we start with the introduction?
Navgurukul is challenging the question of equal access to higher education, quality education, and more than that, high career growth job opportunities. And how are we doing that right now? It's a fully funded year-long residential learning program where we train young adults from socially and economically marginalized communities into software engineering. So within 1 year, the focus is on training them with programming languages, English training, and a lot of leadership development, quality development, personality development. Basically, we want to protect the notion of choice, right? You're not going to get into a job because it's your circumstances. We want our students to be able to come to a point where they choose jobs that no, the company culture is not good. I don't want to be here. I want to be here. And thankfully, in last 2 years, around 60 students have been placed in really good companies. Some companies are as big as Mindtree or ThoughtWorks or DirectEye. And student salaries have ranged from 20,000 to 40,000 per month. These are starting salaries, and we hope that they're going to grow, and the students are going to grow it in their professional journey. And the plus thing is that these students are now become at young age, at 18 and 19, they're becoming the biggest breadwinners in the family. And there's a lot that comes to your life and to your family when you are so financially independent, especially for girls in our campus. I think it's the impact on their personal lives is massive, and not just on their own personal life, in their personal life of their community. Forget just the family. So yeah, Navgurukul is a fully funded year-long residential learning program for training software engineers.
So it's like Super 30 is another example. They pick 30 students from underprivileged backgrounds and give them training, right? So I'm not saying you are like that. I just want to ask you, you probably also have like a number of seats that you have to select X number of people, and amongst the background you select the brightest. Is it like incorrect or unfair to say that?
When we mentioned that colleges have this idea of getting the best of the best of the best.
Yeah.
It's a very cliched idea of getting the best aptitude people. I think Super 30 or any such initiative does fall into that trap as well. Right? I mean, because our focus is only to get people into IIT, then the focus is to get the most promising students towards doing it. And Super 30, unfortunately, has been blamed for many malpractices to make sure that happens. I mean, one of the reasons, key things that is very important for us is to not get into that trap.
Yeah.
Ensure that we really look forward to make our curriculum and approach inclusive. And inclusivity does not come unless you're willing to take steps towards it, right? I mean, if you're saying they're inclusive towards
Transgender
people or girls from tribal areas, how can you be inclusive to them unless your curriculum ensures that people who are lagging behind because of the lack of privilege, they're able to catch up? So there's a very strong philosophical disagreement, I think, the way screening happens otherwise. We try not to increase our technical levels even if we have the option to.
Yeah. We're actually reducing it. We're reducing the entry barriers. That how can we make it? We would envision a curriculum where anyone who wants to do something can pursue it and not be hindered by it.
For example, in case of boys, we do screening because, as you mentioned, we have more applications, and that screening happens in terms of privilege and culture. So if there are students, if 100 students cleared a test and we need only 30, we'll try to do that on a basis of social criteria or criteria in terms of how much they're already looking forward to or how much they already align with the community values that we have. So essentially, academically, we philosophically have this very simple understanding. We have to work at the lowest possible bar and ensure that our curriculum or our 1 year journey is actually working a lot.
So talking to you guys, and especially like how Surbhi began, like it seems culture at Navgurukul is like a very important aspect. So like I'd like you guys to venture into that now. Like what is it about the culture at Navgurukul?
Okay, culture at Navgurukul. There's a lot that goes into it. The first and foremost is that it's driven by the students fully. So they decide what is the arrangement that they want to be part of, right? So what does that mean? They decide the learning pace. They decide the content that they want to learn. They decide even the logistics of the place, like the budget is taken care by them, the food is taken care by them, the discipline is taken care by them. They come up with the rules, they come up with the penalties, they come up with the tasks that they have to be finished. So our girls' campus is in Bangalore and the boys' campus is in Dharamshala, Himachal. When the students come here, the new students are inducted by the old students. So the new students are told what are the rules of the place, which means they have to take care of the cooking, they have to take care of their living, and they have to take care of the learning. There are tribes. The whole new batch is divided into different tribes. Each tribes take the responsibility of each other's learning. So let's say if in a tribe there are 5 girls, the tribe is not going to move forward when everyone else is not moving forward. So let's say they're learning Python, they're going to help each other out in Python. That, hey, I'm doing this lecture. Do you want to do this lecture with me? And there are a set of tasks which are set by both the students and their tech mentors. And then they together discipline themselves to finish those tasks. So that's one is the tribe culture. The tribe basically keeps each other accountable in learning and their whatever task that they have to do. So one is the tribe. Second, we have councils, which is essentially discipline council, financial council, food council. So all of these 3-4 things take care of the operations of Navgurukul. So the students will decide the budget of the place and that they'll spend it accordingly. So that also helps them in taking solid decisions, right? Like they're managing the budget of, let's say, 1.5 lakh rupees of groceries. So they have to be really wise about it.
So I think in terms of curriculum and the pedagogy, we have one aspect that I've mentioned. We have a platform called Saral, which has content in Hindi to start with. The idea being is that I ask you to learn programming in German language. it'll be very hard for you to do so because assuming you don't know the language. One is a problem of knowing the language. Second is learning something which is very new to you, right? Programming in this case. So we told ourselves that they have to start in Hindi, and eventually when they become comfortable at least with programming, and they also go through English learning at the same time. After 4 or 5 months, they basically shift to the mainstream courses, Coursera or SAT or whatever. But they have to start in a much more cushioned way, such that learning is not affected by not knowing the language. So we start like that. So we created a lot of curriculum in Python, and for us, even doing Python curriculum was not easy because a lot of these students did not know basic maths. Example, they would not know how algebra works. So even something like Boolean operators was not easy. So, like for example, I never even I don't know when I learned Boolean operators. I mean that thing really never happened explicitly, but here it happens very explicitly. So initial 4 5 months are sort of to get them into programming zone itself, and actually we can say effectively the programming starts after 7 months. First 5 6 months is to make sure that they understand maths basics, which are important for the programming. While it happens only through programming, so we will not do any maths course, but the idea is, let's say they're doing Boolean operators, they also understand what numbers basically are. It's still a work in progress. We are far behind from where we want to be, and that's where I feel that we have to do a lot of work to be more inclusive, clearly, because that's what ensure that who is able to complete this part to move to the next one. So this part is really important. The other really important part is that we do not evaluate people on their outcomes. We evaluate them on the basis of what they're delivering, what they're basically doing. The idea is simple. Let's say if there are two students, that's I mean that's something which there's a famous comic strip where there are many animals out there, and there's a evaluator which says like whosoever climbs a tree first out of all of you will basically award that person the first grade. The animals are of very different nature. One is a fish, another is a monkey, another is an elephant. So clearly there are differences in how they will do it. And the mockery is clearly on our education and evaluation system. And the same things happen in our colleges, right? I mean, people come from such a diverse background, and we give them the same examinations and tell them that you do not know this, you do not know this, you do not know this. So at Navgurukul, we realized that since we're building again a diverse community, we cannot do this. And the focus is really on the inputs that they're doing, because that's where a lot of efforts is going on, right? So who is really really putting most of the work? Who is really trying to bring the values of helping each other out? So essentially, the values and the inputs are awarded. So to give a very simple contrasting example, if you're going to have a hackathon in a college, you're going to be awarded for the best product or the fanciest possible thing that you've built. At Navgurukul, when hackathons happen, there are 3 4 different kinds of awards. One is for the team which worked hardest during the hackathon. Whatever you did, whatever you could achieve is a different thing altogether. But did you work hardest? Did you try to do it? Second, the team which tried to help the other teams most. So that way you're encouraging the right values, right? Social engineering in a very fancy way. Third, the team which tried to make a product which was most inclusive in terms of the use case. So did you build a parking application, or did you build something which is much more useful to other people, right? We do have some assessments on the basis of outcomes. We don't have any examinations at all. At the same time, when the students feel they're ready for an interview, they request for an interview, and an alumni student basically interviews them and shares their assessment in a subjective manner. So we again made a point that you cannot give them a score. It's inhuman to tell them you're 6 on 10, 7 on 10, 4 on 10. It does not work like that. Tell them the good, bad, and ugly. Tell them what they're good at. Tell them what they are bad at and what they can work on immediately. And ugly is just, I mean, we use this term because obviously it comes from a movie, but ugly is more of a introspective place where you can think of larger patterns in your learning behavior which needs to be corrected. So by doing that, I mean, the outcome-based assessments are much fewer, and they're very subjective, and they're mostly at your own request. Then we try to kill the race, right? I mean, there's always this race: who's going to do it faster? Who's going to do it faster? We kill it absolutely. Like, okay, it does not matter. It does not matter. What matters is you learn at your pace. You learn while being happy, and whenever you're ready, you basically catch it. Whether you take 6 months or you take 1.5 years, you're never going to celebrate it. What you're going to celebrate is were you someone who you really had a nice journey or not. And so most of the appreciation that happens in the community is centered around it. You will really find someone saying, "Oh, so for example, there's this girl Ravina. She comes. Her baselines were the smallest in her batch. I mean, she's a. It should have been, the case where she should have been the most suffering person, the most depressed person. It's completely the way around. She is the life of this campus, and that's because she just accepted. I'm going to take more time to do this. And in her mind, it's not a 1 year course anymore. It's a 2 year, 3 year course. She learns music, she learns dance, she learns video editing, everything she learns, and she takes lot of initiatives in the community. She gets a lot of awards in the community because all those awards are around hard work, and she's probably one of the hardest working people out here. At the same time, her conceptual depth is crazy, to the point that people who graduated in 8 months, they were essentially being mentored by Ravina. when they really had to work on the concepts. Primarily because while Lavina spent 1.5 years to learn in terms of the length, 1/3 of what they would have learned, but her depth is far more than anyone else. So a lot of our culture in terms of learning is centered around building the right values. That's why I think Surbhi and I continuously keep jumping back to values. Because while implementation is what you see, values is what drives it. Values is what tells that we have to have certain standards of the implementation, and it values is what challenges us to keep improvising on them, whatever implementation it is.
I want to ask one question which is pretty personal to me, and I definitely want to ask your opinion on that. So I come from Bihar. People only care about maths. There's nothing about like, oh, this guy is able to speak in English and all that. Obviously, you carry that burden like forward, where you get hit with like placement communities not telling you like you're not good enough. You're sitting in off campus, and people are like just destroying you. How are you dealing with that? Where people who come with like not even a base level of like English and try to increase that common denominator where everyone at least has a basic understanding of like English, and you take it from there.
Yeah. So, so to Sagar's question first, I mean, the first thing again for us is to really establish that you're going to have different English levels and be okay with that. We have seen the most drastic improvements in terms of learning English from the people who actually knew it least. Uh, First of all, we need to sort of make learners very comfortable with the idea of not and not comparing with each other. If you know English, it's not that you're smarter, just that you had the privilege to be exposed to the language. So when you sort of start reducing it to that, people realize that if I do not know English, it's not my fault, and I can learn it. All I have to give myself is the exposure, and I have to work towards it. So by doing that, essentially, you're able to have a very strong mentally important effect on the children. Because obviously the learners who are struggling, they do not feel they're struggling anymore. They just feel they need to work harder. And there's a very huge difference. I think that's the most important thing for us. And obviously, uh, uh, there are very simple things like the campus is only English speaking, so you only speak English basically. If you don't know English, fine, you make a symbol, you say the same thing in Hindi, people will help you with that. But you have to speak in English. Also, at the same time, we need to ensure that they are not thinking that English is the supreme force in the universe. So there's a very simple rule: once you get English, you choose your language. So then it's a conscious choice. The only thing is to reject English, you need to know English, unfortunately. And there are a lot of games that we're trying to develop because we realize that we cannot make it. So, I mean, let's say software engineering is taking a lot of your mental bandwidth. The English should not do that. English should rather rejuvenate you. So, there are a lot of physical games that we're trying to plan such that students can learn English effectively. For example, there's something called Navgurukul Club where the students sit together, they assign goals to themselves. For example, there's someone who's a time checker, there's someone who's a family leader, many roles. And then they do debates. And then other people give them feedback, etc. So, there are many such activities that they do. They play Mafia in English. Just play games, just expose yourself, watch movies in class, and it's okay. Do whatever.
So over multiple batches, have you seen the sort of efficiency of peer learning from like senior to junior batches become better, or like some best practices have distilled out and it's easier to orient newer students and batches now?
Becoming better, definitely. I mean, in fact, that's one of the biggest complaints that our alumni students have. They always come and say, when we came, it was so hodgepodge, it was so chaotic, and now it's so much better than these students. And I always tell them that, it's just a compliment and take it as a compliment rather than as a complaint because any system which is going well, it has to, have this complaint from the people who came first. So I think over the clearly we have made a lot of progress. There's a lot to be done, but the good part is that the ownership is very shared. So the students themselves come with a lot of techniques, and some of their techniques are very interesting. So, for example, we introduce pair programming, which is a very obvious technique from the world, right? But then the students change the technique and they call a technique called takma, tera code, mera question. So what they would do is because some students are writing code without questioning a lot, so they said we'll build your question power by questioning on your behalf. So let's say if you are coding, the task will keep pushing you for questions. ये कैसे किया? ये क्यों किया? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do that? So essentially, they do this very rigorous questioning just to make sure that the person is asking those questions to himself while coding on as well. So that was the technique that they came up with, and now they follow it. So I think there's a lot of creation from the student side itself in terms of how do we work on this.
You guys have mentioned the word diversity many times. What is your vision of diversity and what are the initiatives that you're taking for it? And like the other question is a bit unrelated is people who like look up to you, like admire your work, like how can they contribute?
Yeah. So just briefly touching upon the vision of diversity, I think it should be accessible to the most vulnerable, and most vulnerable is very contextual. It changes. So for example, if you're just focusing on gender, it becomes can you span through men, women, transgender people, right? So right, this batch we're trying to make sure that we get at least few trans women and trans men to give the test or try it out. If you talk about caste, within caste, you have so much of social hierarchy. So, for example, there's a Musahar community in Bihar, which is lowest in the caste hierarchy rung. And so, how do you ensure that the girls from that community is coming to our campus? You talk about social issues as a context. So, you talk about if someone who has survived child trafficking or human trafficking, how can we make sure they come here? HIV positive people, how do we make sure they come here? Or differently able or disabled people, how do we make sure they come here? So in fact, like this time someone did ask me about, can you take in a blind student? And we did have a discussion around it, and we said, you know what, we'd open it up and see what happens. We're going to build our capacity and not put the pressure on the person to not access this. So that's the vision of diversity, that people who are most vulnerable in their context should be able to access Navgurukul. And diversity is nothing without inclusion. So then every time a new context comes in the campus, we need to make sure that the person is included properly and peacefully and joyfully in the campus. So that's diversity and inclusion for us. Talking about your second question, how people can help us in so many ways, in practical sense, one, we need dedicated mentors and volunteers. So a lot of people show interest in Navgurukul's work and they want to help us. But I think a lot of people take volunteering not as professionally as they take their corporate job. We love when people make relationships with our students, because that's when the most learning happens. So a lot of on campus, people can come and take sessions, periodic sessions. They can decide how many sessions with the students. Of course, they need to decide it with the students. How many sessions do they want to take? On what do they want to take sessions? So one is mentoring. Second is funding. We can always use, monetary support, both for expanding our operations so that we can do more outreach to, deeper, the diverse communities that I was talking to you about, because outreach requires a lot of resources. The third one, which could really work for us, just talk about our work, because partnership is how we drive the whole system. We need a lot of NGO partners who are doing amazing work with their own communities, and they are the ones who send their students to us or their associated children to us. So yeah, talk about his work, spread the word. If you feel any sort of partnership is possible, let us know. Anything else? And yeah, discuss Navgurukul more as a philosophy, I guess, because that could actually bring change. I personally feel very proud of the values of Navgurukul. I think those values can be inculcated in your homes, in your workplaces, and your education institutions. Basically, talk about us as a philosophy and challenge us. So that's all the help that probably we could use.
Actually, I have one last sort of a cliche engineering question. How are you about scaling this model? Like, have you thought about, since I heard that it's very sort of self driven and kind of it sort of takes its own shape, and you encourage that, you encourage things to evolve on their own?
The answer is resounding yes. Okay, so objectively speaking, like in terms of goals for scaling, there are multiple things that we are thinking. One, we should be able to provide multiple curriculum options to students. Like if you're talking about choice of profession, they should be able to choose whether they want to be, let's say, a psychologist or a graphic illustrator or something else. So all the modern skill sets, we want to expand in that. Diversifying your curriculum is one area where we're going to thinking of expanding, and of course, in terms of numbers as well, that can we open a bigger campus for students from different places? Can we lower our entry barriers so that more students who need such an opportunity can use it? So we're thinking about it. The only thing that we're not rushing towards it, because we do want to understand how can we scale up while retaining our core values, and I think that requires a lot of thinking and also a lot of doing. So one side is the admission side. How do we perfect this cycle of reaching out to most diverse? Unless we're not diverse enough, we're not moving forward. Because if you want to open a campus for boys, campus of whatever 500 boys, we can do it tomorrow itself. But we don't want to do it because we do want to make sure that unless we don't have at least 50-50 boys to girls ratio, or we don't have diverse caste and religion in on campus, we're not moving forward. So the moment you give yourself that constraint towards scaling up, you're able to be loyal to your initial values, right? On which this whole thing was founded. So yeah, I mean, we're thinking about scaling up only once we have perfected our certain cycles. But the conversation is very, very much on, and I think some funders are really interested in having both the scaling conversation and the philosophical conversation, which in many ways makes us very lucky.
So as we mentioned, like every value that we sort of trying to push ourselves on makes a challenge harder, and yet it makes it more beautiful at the same time. For us, the diversity really holds a lot of values. For example, the value of really looking on the inputs rather than outputs is very important. And that's why the Subi mentioned that each and every value that we're trying to work on is so dear to us that we feel that a lot more conversation has to happen so that um, another I think key thing that we are essentially now starting to work towards is to build a network of people who really align with these values and figure out if we can have a more vocal group of people towards Navgurukul because ultimately we're a very small team. It's just me, Surbhi, and one or two more people are working towards it. So 90% of our time is actually just spent on working. So what we need is also a group of people who can help us spread what we're trying to do around, mobilize resources, whether it be funds, whether it be like people who can advise us, etc.
I just want to quickly mention that yeah, of course it was extremely inspiring listening to what you are doing. It was definitely mind blowing, especially the part about kind of intentionally creating a diverse environment is something that I think is just at the cutting edge. And I would really hope that what you learn sort of goes out to the world and really sort of informs other people in their endeavors. So more power to you and best of luck.